Thank you for joining us for the Living on Purpose and Not by Accident podcast, brought to you by Summit Financial Group and remedylive. I'm your host, Heather Herron, and I'm delighted once again to welcome back the Melvilles. We got to spend some time with you in our last segment, and we just couldn't let you go because we wanted to hear more about the many ways in which you are living on purpose. Let's go back for just a bit and talk about the foundation that you created and why you felt like it was something that you needed to do.
I think that there is great opportunity to do more. And oftentimes we think more is more of the same or what we're already doing. I think the more is the things that we're called to in places that are uncomfortable, that we often turn or look away from, or we think, somebody else should probably do that. So I'm going to continue doing what I'm doing. So in this opportunity for us to do more and to go into these spaces, it was for sure very hard, very difficult. But I think what has been most surprising to me is that as hard as it has been, that there's a steady flow of rewards. Things that were unexpected, that feel so right and so good, that you're often looking for ways to do more of that. And by example, what I mean is when we have our Thanksgiving Day baskets, and we have an opportunity to invite people in to help us fill food baskets and then carry them to the car of those who will be receiving them. It is with such joy and delight. For example, when somebody says, I have not had celebrated Thanksgiving in a traditional way in the last 5 or 6 years because we haven't had the money to do so. This year, not only will we do that, but we will invite others to be a part of that Thanksgiving celebration. I was so struck by that particular comment because I'm thinking if you haven't had it, maybe you'll just keep the extra that you have. But that wasn't her attitude at all. It was that she would share it with others. Randy, what do you think about that?
I think, Heather, we try to live under the principle of to whom much is given, much is required. And that's really been the fuel, that's been the catalyst for us to move into some of those hard spaces that Lael talks about. I often tell people who want to volunteer in these spaces that, listen, come, you will receive more than you give. And people initially think of this as an expenditure of time. They may think of it as a giving of capital. But what you really get is nourishment from your soul. And when people actually do that, not only I think are they surprised, because I think when you're able to touch someone or when you view someone as another human being like you, and you think, if I were in that situation, would I want someone to be able to help me? And undoubtedly, the answer is yes. And so when you see that reciprocal nature of what you give and then how you receive back, I think it's an encouragement not only to us, but to bring others along in the journey. And that really motivates us to move from an idea to action.
You know, you really hit on something for me. And I was just remembering in a paper that I wrote, and I was thinking about giving. And there is giving where you just pass something out and people move along their way. But it's also giving in a way that shares your heart or shares the intention with which you're giving, and it's an honorable one. And I think that brief interaction can really change the trajectory of a person's day when you give in a way that elevates and lifts and encourages, as opposed to just showing up. And listen, people just show up all the time, and that's okay. I'm just talking now about a higher level of giving and how I think that is important in these kinds of spaces.
So you decided to form the Melville Family Foundation. Tell me again, what is your mission?
Yeah, our mission is to improve the lives of Black and brown children in the southern sector of Dallas by focusing on economic empowerment, food insecurity, and academic excellence.
And as you've gone through the process of forming a foundation and really identifying what the needs were that you wanted to meet, what did you learn? What are some of the lessons that you took away from it?
I learned that the perceptions and assumptions that I made in terms of what the community needed was wrong. I also learned that the perspective I had, which is how I've been trained in terms of really diagnosing a problem, breaking it down, developing solutions, then executing it, was the wrong approach. I went into the foundation and thinking about the community and what we were going to do, focused on the problem. I should have been focused on the people, then the process that then led to the problem. So that was the second thing that I learned. And the final thing that I would say is we're often in situations, whether it's in the boardroom or in committees, et cetera, where you're talking about a particular community and how you might be able to help the community. And the assumptions that are made around the table are by people who aren't the benefactor of the very thing that you're providing. And so we've been very intentional by saying, great input, thank you for that information, but we're going to ask the constituent, we're going to ask, and this, if I could use this nomenclature, the customer, around what is it that they want, and then be able to work that backwards. So those have been some of the things that we've tried to implement as we have our foundation in the community.
I learned that respect is paramount and that people deserve respect. And our opinions about how people live or behave in ways that are different from our own are not required in a space that serves well. I learned that even though we have a great opportunity to give and bring others along to give, and we need that giving to happen, finances and as well as volunteerism, we need that to happen. It is not just that we invite people to give in those spaces, but we invite people to learn about what the work is that we're doing so that they understand what they're giving to. You see, at the end of the day, I'm hoping that we change hearts and minds on both sides of the table. Has been on more than one occasion that folks have said to Randy and I that we appreciate your giving, but what's really surprising to us is that you show up to help work with the giving. So I really want to invite people to consider giving, but also to show up in the space that they give. So I learned how important that is. And I think the final thing that I'd like to share that was very different from what I expected was I've seen poverty. I think our families have lived in levels of poverty. But the poverty that I see now is not just the lack of wealth, it's the poverty in spirit or levels of hopelessness. And that deserves a respectful response as well. And I think part of programming can respond to that, but I think it's primarily interaction with people who are caring and want to be in those spaces that really can make a big difference.
Your faith is, paramount. It's at the center of everything that you do. How do you remain faithful when you see the poverty of spirit, when you see the economic disparity, when you see the educational gaps? What is it that carries you through?
Yeah, great question, Heather. And the thing that immediately comes to mind for me is we walk by faith and not by sight. And so trying not to get really caught up in what you see, because if you do, it's so disparaging. It's what I mentioned earlier about it's a 40-minute ride from North to South Texas, but the distance miles will be from Earth to Mars. That's based on what you see. But if you have the idea that you're really motivated by faith, and more importantly, in spite of what we might see, that God is still in control. And it's those two pillars that really allow us to continue doing our work. And I want to build on something that Lael was talking about earlier in terms of the giving and what I thought would be easy has actually turned out to be hard. And what I thought would be hard has actually turned out to be easy. And what I mean by that is what I thought would be hard is raising money. And we've been very fortunate to have some great corporate partners who've come alongside us and who have willingly given capital to certain initiatives, whether it's on literacy or in our food insecurity programs or in our mentoring program. So that's been great. What I thought was going to be easy that's turned out to be hard is to actually have people give us their time. So what we found, it's been much easier for people to give capital than it is to give time. Now, time obviously is the most precious asset that we have. And what we really have been trying to do is move people beyond just the writing of the check. And what we would actually prefer is to have people actually come out of their comfort zone, as we talked about, come out of the bubble that they might be living in to really work in the community. So we want them to see people as other human beings, as opposed to I'm handing out and giving a handout check, because I think it denotes a different mindset. It's the parable of giving someone a fish versus teaching someone to fish. And we really want to bring the community together to help people learn how to be fishermen as opposed to just receiving the fish.
I love that you asked the question of faith. My heart leaped at the question because faith is the engine that drives it for us. And oftentimes faith is thought about as the evidence of things not seen but hoped for. And so we don't always get to see what we really want. We want everybody to be fed. We want people to have access to medical care, and we want literacy to be a non-issue. So I'm going to believe and work for that. And it is my faith that drives me to believe that, because it's not seen, but I am hoping for it. And on the days where my faith is tested, I think I have a few go-tos that are helpful. One is, I believe the God that did it before will do it again. So I've seen God do great things in my personal life and in the work that we're doing now. So I believe he'll do it again. I think the other part of when my faith is tested, it's so helpful because I live with a man of faith. So sometimes I can borrow some of his faith to help mine out. And that's really good. And then finally, I believe in prayer. And prayer looks like sometimes through praise and worship or singing and things like that. So I can help myself by leaning on things that I know work, or reading the word, or just things, those things encourage me so that when it is time to get back to it, most times I'm ready.
A lot of people have great ideas, great intent. They mean well. But what advice do you have for those who want to turn those ideas into action, turn it into something that really is going to make a significant impact?
I would suggest a couple of things. One, I would suggest committing the idea to paper. I think it's something in the brain about when you write things down versus when you just speak them or you say them casually. I think there's a level of accountability, which will tie to my second point. So I would say write things down. Two, I would say have an accountability partner or partners. Tell people, Heather, I'm going to start this foundation, and this time I want to be very intentional about that. I want you to hold me accountable to that. And I think there's a level of commitment and accountability that comes when you have an accountability partner, number two. And then three, I would say just be in prayer about it. Just if you took those 3 steps, writing it down to paper, having an accountability partner, being in prayer about it, God will move you in a direction that you would need to move in. Those would be the suggestions I would offer.
And I would say dream, and dream big. Like if you are dreaming and you can figure it out, then that is not big enough. So dream. I think the next thing I would say is get up early. Get up early. And in that early space of fatigue or maybe excitement or whatever your morning looks like, because everybody doesn't get up well, get up. And in that space, in that quiet time, begin the download that Randy is talking about of writing things down and thinking carefully and freely about what this might look like. And then I think for me, the final thing is test your ideas against ideas that exist. So if you are looking to start a foundation, then what are other foundations that may look similar to yours or the one you're dreaming about? And then carve out carefully from what exists to the one that you want to create, and then live in that.
Have you had people in your own lives that have been influential in that regard? People you look up to, people you've sought advice from?
Oh, absolutely. Yes. I had a mentor who was just very influential in moving me from thinking systematically about a problem, putting an action plan in place, and then having measurable results. And I've found that those skills are applicable not just in corporate America, but also in starting a foundation. And so I often think about some of the lessons that he taught me, and Lael is familiar with him. And those things were extremely helpful. I don't think anything of significance you accomplish alone. I think you need a partner, you need people, you need a soulmate to really kind of help move you to, as you were saying earlier, Heather, people have good intentions, but they don't actually actualize the action. And I think having those partners and people who come alongside you can really move you in a space that's helpful to get the idea off the ground.
I like finding mentors in unlikely spaces. The other day I was talking with friends about someone I realized who was shepherding me, and I had not ever given her credit or ever talked about it out loud other than when I read about it. And it was just a guiding place. And I won't remember her name in the space, so please put it up when we finish this. But it was a woman who did laundry in Mississippi. And she wasn't able to finish school. She had the dream of becoming a nurse, and she wasn't able to do that because of obligations and sicknesses in her own family. And she came from a legacy of people who did wash. And so she washed clothes for people. She never had a car. She never went beyond the 6th grade. But when she died, she gave $150,000 to a local university because her commitment was to live beyond her own means and to help people do what she wasn't able to do. That's a level of mentorship for me, that showing me that it doesn't matter necessarily the resources you come from or what you think about what you're able to do, but then you live in the space that you occupy so that you can help others live in theirs. So it's okay to look at mentorship differently too.
The title of the podcast is Living on Purpose, Not by Accident. What does living on purpose look like for you in the next 5 years, 10 years, and beyond?
Well, I'm going to just say that that's hard for me because I live so intentional each day. I have lists, and my lists have lists, and it's okay if the stuff doesn't get done on the list, but I enjoy thinking about what is the end goal for the day or the week, and then how do I travel to that space? And I get to do that in different areas or boards or ways I get to serve. So I think probably if I allow myself to think broadly about that now, like what would that look like in the next 5 or 10 years? I hope that we are able to triple and double, quadruple what we're able to accomplish in our foundation. I hope that we have inspired people in a way that reminds them that when you don't think you can, God can. And then I think finally, the way I might think about in 5 or 10 years is I hope that we get to have conversations like this that will help people think about how they can expand their level of giving. I hope that's what we get to do.
I think of the answer to your question, Heather, on 3 dimensions. I would concur with Lael in terms of the impact in the community of our foundation. And I really view our foundation as a bridge, as a connector. And my hope is that if the bridge or the connection is let's say 2 miles, that in 5-10 years from now, it's 25 miles. So we're able to broaden that connection between communities. And once we bring people together who are different, what they find out is we have more in common than uncommon. That's one. Two, I would hope being very intentional about our immediate family. We're going to be grandparents for the first time. So we're really excited about that and learning and thinking about what that chapter is like and being able to impact just within our own community of our family. And then the third dimension I think about is just me personally, working on being a better husband, a better father, a better friend, a better servant. I always want to continue to grow and learn and push myself. And I don't think you get to that place unless you're very intentional and living on purpose and trying to achieve that. So those would be the three areas that I would hope that we would live and actually act out.
You know, one thing I just really feel led to say, and if it doesn't fit, it's okay. But I want to talk about or just speak to the power of prayer, about saying things out loud. I think when God asked us to pray without ceasing, that really meant to find words, and sometimes we're wordless, and so groans are just fine. But to be able to say out loud to God, prayer is just conversation, and how it is that we speak with God and speak into our future and speak into the possibilities is incredibly important. And so I just want to encourage conversations with God.
I love how you are living on purpose and not by accident. I know you've inspired me getting to visit with you for a very short time. So I'm sure that those who are watching or listening to this will feel inspired as well. And I wish you all the best.
Great. Thank you so much for your time,
Thank you,
Heather.
Heather.
It's been wonderful.
It's been great. Thank you, Heather.
Thank you.